Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here today. The 2022-2023 budget delivered in October 2022 predicted net overseas migration would be 235,000 people for the financial year 22-23. Can I ask whether the Treasury's definition of net overseas migration differs from the Australian Bureau of Statistics' definition of overseas migration?
Sorry, can you just...
Do you have the same definition of
Yes, we do.
Net? You do. Okay, good. Thank you. So I want to go to your department's immigration forecast. I notice that in the October 2022 budget paper, 4 months into that financial year, you were predicting net overseas migration at 235,000 people for the year. Instead, the Australian Bureau of Statistics says Australia had 737,000 migrant arrivals for a net overseas migration of 518,000, well over double what you said.
So in the budget, we had a figure of net overseas migration of 400,000. The MyEFO had 510, and I recognise that is a significant miss. I would, however, flag a couple of things around that. The first is that the UK, in the period between March and November last year, had to double their non-forecast. New Zealand had a similar adjustment. There has been a significant uptick in student arrivals post-COVID in most countries, so Canada, Australia, UK, New Zealand. There was a catch-up that was much faster than any of those countries predicted. We are still below where we would otherwise have been had COVID not occurred. But I think you're right in saying those forecasts could have been better, if that's the point you're making. I would say we are in company. Don't say good company, but we are in company, and that is something we do need to look at. The other point I'd make is that there have been some really significant changes that have been introduced in the last 6 months around closing off the pandemic event visa, introducing really significant integrity changes around student visas, looking at ways at actually targeting better temporary skilled migration and indexing the TSMIT, the temporary skilled migration income threshold. So we would expect those changes to have quite a substantial impact on arrivals and the NOM numbers.
Okay, Minister, thank you. I'll stay with you, Ms. Reinhardt. I think that you talked about catching up on pre-COVID era statistics. And my understanding is that we had 1.9 million people on visas before the COVID, and by October 23 we had 2.3 million people. We'd already caught up well and truly at the start of that year. Now, I can't tell you which group of visas.
We haven't fully caught up, but in terms of visa numbers, I see...
No, we've more than caught up in categories of working visas.
No, not in terms of the stock of
in working visas?
We look at net overseas migration in total, but
I've shifted
Ms Reinhardt's statement is correct, as we have not caught up to pre-COVID for total net overseas migration.
But Treasury don't look at what particular visa type you're on. That would be a matter for Home Affairs. Thank
you for pointing that out. But nonetheless, this huge increase in people has a huge impact on the people who are already here. What happens to the price of houses, rentals, accommodation generally, energy, groceries, cost of living? It's a huge impact on all of those things when we have so many people flooding into the country.
So I'm really not best placed to answer the broader inflation questions, but I would say that net overseas migration has really significant positive impacts for Australia. That's been shown in the analysis year after year. We have maintained in Australia a very low unemployment rate whilst having pretty long-term migrants to Australia for several hundred years, and that's been a really important factor to our economic success, and it has also in recent times not resulted in a substantial uptick in unemployment, nor at the same time we've seen really high participation rates for Australians. So I really would push back on the idea that that is a negative, an absolute negative for Australians. It's delivered substantial economic benefits to Australians.
It would be, potentially, if it was done in a carefully calculated way and if it was done with infrastructure spending to match. But we haven't built a dam in how many decades? The water supply.
Moving into a different area.
That's right. I'm directing my question at you, Minister. This has a huge impact on people's livelihoods.
Well, I think the evidence that you've been given is that overseas or migration to this country has supported economic growth across the country for many, many, many years. We agree that we need to tighten up some of the arrangements that we're seeing, particularly around international students and some of the loopholes that were being used, some of the behavioural responses post-COVID, and that work is being done. So there'll be 180, because of those reforms, there'll be 180,000 fewer people over the forward estimates than there would have been if we had left the situation unattended to. But there's
still a large number.
There's a huge amount of work. Well, it comes down to I think 250,000 in the final year of the forward estimates. But you know, the work that the Minister for Home Affairs are doing in the migration space has been complex, and she inherited a lot of issues in that department. That's probably putting it politely, and we're working through them bit by bit, but those reforms are in place. And your issues that you raise around infrastructure are real. I don't think you can blame all of those again on overseas migration to this country. I mean, infrastructure requires long-term planning. It involves investments from states and territories. And, you know, some of the pressures we're seeing in housing supply haven't happened overnight or haven't happened in the last 2 years. It's been a build-up of a much longer period of time when we, you know, weren't experiencing those high levels of overseas migration that we've seen in the last 2 years. So, you know, it's more complex than that, I guess, in the end. But, yeah, we've got to work on housing supply. We've got to ensure we're building infrastructure that's right for people in the cities and towns and regions across Australia. We've got to fix the migration system, and we've got to make sure it works for everybody.
But that's my point, Minister. Just adding more people without doing all the other creates a problem.
Well,
Sure, it increases economic growth. That looks good in a book or on a whiteboard.
Well, it supports jobs and incomes in this country, you know, so it is interlinked. But what I'm saying is we will always want to have a migration program. We want to attract people to this country. We want them to live here and from any country around the world. There are good social and economic reasons to have an approach like that. But at the same time, you have to be looking after your back garden as well. You know, you have to be making sure the infrastructure's there and building the housing, and we're doing all of those things.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Roberts.